Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Harnessing the Positive Power of Video Games. And I saw already in the chat that people have recognized the music and that we have some gamers in the house. So this is going to be fabulous. So first, let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Elizabeth Milovidov, and I am an expert in digital parenting, digital citizenship, and online safety. So I'm also an advisor at the Council of Europe and e-Enfance, which is a French helpline. And I'm an author and a mom of two little boys. So I'm really pleased to get us going here tonight. And so I want to just tell you about our webinar, right? So for decades, millions of families have been playing together, right? That sort of family game night. And more recently, there's been a bit of a twist, right? As we've been playing video games with our children. And we've turned game night into family game night. Video family game night. In fact, last year, more parents than ever picked up a controller and started playing video games with their kids, sharing news stories and experiences while growing closer as a family. And I can attest to this fact from my own family. So those of you who haven't yet sat down with a controller, you might be wondering, well, how can my family benefit from playing video games together? How can we get started? And what do we need to know to ensure that the experience is a positive one? Well, don't you worry, I've got you covered all for the next hour, right? So we have three expert guests who will discuss all of this and more, and they're going to offer insight about a wide array of subjects to help parents better understand how to create an appropriate and beneficial video game experience for every single person in the family. So let's get started. First, I'm going to welcome Andy Robertson. Andy is a video game journalist. He is the author of Taming Gaming and founder of the Family Video Game Database website and a father of three kids. And I saw you waving, Andy, so
Hello,
hello.
great to be here.
Thank you. So next, I'm going to invite Dr. Rachel Corritt to come and say hello. Rachel is a research psychologist. She is the research director at Take This, author of Parents Guide to Video Games, and mother of three children.
Hi.
Great. Last, but definitely, certainly not least, is Patricia Vance, who is the president of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, which is the nonprofit organization that assigns age and content rating information for video games. And Pat is also a mother of two. Welcome, Pat.
So glad to be here, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Well, we are going to have fun. So first, I want to just remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can either throw them into the Q&A, not the chat, because we're not going to be chatting, we're going to be listening, but you can throw them into the Q&A or you can note them on the side and we will promise to answer as many as we can. So let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Andy. So as a father, and lifelong gamer, can you describe for us some of the challenges that you faced with video games when your kids were younger? And I think more importantly, what did you do about it? And actually, I'm sure you have a success story. So please tell us, how did it all work out?
Yeah, so it's tricky, isn't it? The sort of games come at us as parents in a way that other things don't. So I think one of the challenges I found was, well, I know how I parent in other areas. How am I going to do this for video games? And I think it's quite helpful just to sort of create some space to take a step back and think, okay, we've got time to figure this out. And not feel like we have to do it differently just because they're games, and to sort of be confident in our own values in the family. And for me, a big part of that was developing, our family game kind of habits, our traditions and rituals of how we play games together. And I think that kind of set in action, kind of an ongoing relationship with video games that continues to evolve. So I think that's what I would say is, get involved and find a way to play together, but be confident in your own values.
And so I love that you're talking about these values and playing with our children. And I can see from this slide that you're actually playing with your children. So, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it takes me back a few years now. My kids are a bit older, but this, as you can see with me with my really young son on your lap, and the kids arrived, and I was playing games already, and had a lovely kind of time of playing with my very young son kind of next to me. But of course, very quickly, he grew up and wanted to play as well. And so again, you can sort of see as that kind of moved on, he was kind of like to sit alongside me. That controller he's holding there isn't actually plugged in, which was a little trick. So I could keep playing. But then quite quickly, him and his siblings, it became family time when we found ways to play together, and my wife was involved as well. And so it kind of was a growing thing of confidence, but still we kind of made mistakes along the way, and it's not going to be perfect. So I think that's what I want to kind of illustrate here, is that it's just engaging, taking a step towards games, finding the resources that are going to help, the things we're going to be talking about today. And the kind of good news is that we've got time to figure this out as we go. And that's a long time ago for me now, and I'm still figuring out some elements of this now.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. Again, the things that resonate for me are, you said, family time and confidence, and that we're going to figure this out. So thank you so much. But this is you and I who are, we're kind of gaming people. So, but what are you going to suggest to non-gamer parents about how perhaps they can just overcome some of their fears and dive right in there? What can they do?
I think so. Finding some games that you can play yourself is a really powerful thing to do, particularly if you've got children who love games, because it then means that you're not kind of an outsider. And that might be games that you play together as a family. There are loads of games that have sort of a cooperative element. So each of you will hold a controller and you'll look at the same screen and you can play and cooperate. And if you've got older children, they love to kind of, advise and help you along. But if you've got younger children, they also want your involvement, to help. And actually practicing a bit while the kids aren't there can gain a bit of confidence. But to really spend some time to find experiences that kind of click with your family. That might be a theme. Maybe you like fishing or gardening, or there's games about everything. So finding that kind of common ground, and then finding ways to play yourself and kind of gain confidence, so that again, it's something that you're genuinely enjoying and you're not just sort of dipping into and then disappearing.
Oh, this is great. So when you're talking about finding common ground, it just begs the question, right? Of what type of tools are available. So I'm going to ask Pat to come and help us out here. How can we help these parents find the time, dig in there to make these informed decisions about the types of games that their kids can play?
Well, the first step would be to check the ESRB rating information. ESRB ratings have three parts. We have age ratings for age appropriateness, also content descriptors, which will indicate why a particular age rating was assigned, and then interactive elements, which is the newest part of the system, which gives parents a heads up about certain interactive features of the game, such as the ability to interact with other players or make in-game purchases. So each part of the system is equally important. Based on our research with parents, we know that they value each one of these parts of the system. So it's important to check all three parts. The ratings can be found on physical games. You'll see the age rating on the front, and when you flip the box over, you'll see the content descriptors and the interactive elements as well. But that rating information is also available wherever games are advertised, wherever they're sold. So if you go online to download a game, you'll see the rating information, or you purchase it online, you'll see the rating information. If you're looking at trailers online or game publisher websites, you'll see that rating information. So it's really available across the board for parents to take advantage of. For physical games, in other words, those games that are sold at retail in boxes, we also have something that's very valuable to parents. So if they've checked out the rating information and they still want more information, we have something called rating summaries, which are available through a title search on our website or through our mobile app, which give parents not just examples of the content that we found in the game when we rated it, but also the context in which that content appeared. So it really answers any remaining questions that parents may have about the appropriateness of the game. So it's really important. Again, check all three parts of the system and make sure that those rating summaries are available if you need more information.
Oh, no, I think this is great. So really now we have no excuse, right? As parents, we can find it on the box. We can find the app. I think that is fabulous. We can get on websites. So this is super. So right now we're able to make an informed decision. We're able to find this game that we want to play. But what other tools are going to be available to make sure that really our children are having the best experience, the most positive experience when they're online?
Well, so most parents we know have household rules. That's a great tool.
Yep.
It doesn't require any technology. It is
Works in my
something
house.
exactly, and most parents have them about video games. So it's important to start the conversation, establish those rules, keep that door open for ongoing conversations. I mean, it's just being a parent is probably the best tool we have. But also, parents can't be around all the time. So there are parental controls on all the game devices, all the consoles have them. We have a website called parentaltools.org, which actually give you step-by-step instructions on how to set those parental controls up. And you can do things like, when you're not around, block games from being played that don't have an age rate, that have an age rating that you didn't approve of, or control spending. We know that parents, that's probably the number one control that they set is the amount of money that a child can spend online. And then limiting time. We know parents are concerned about the amount of time that kids can play and the amount of screen time. So you can limit the amount of time spent and even the day of the week, or so those tools are available. And then lastly, again, something we know the parents are really concerned about is online play. Who can my child play with? Can my child play online with other players? So there are all sorts of tools and settings that you can establish as a parent, and that's password protected, so that you can, when you're not around, really manage the way that your child plays, who they can play with, when, and of course, how much money they can spend.
Well, I'm listening to this, and of course, it just begs the question, Pat, what can families do? My boys are different ages. So what do we do if we have a younger child and then an older child, and we're looking at these parental controls, or we're trying to figure out the ratings? What type of advice would you give us?
So, as far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of tools, not just available outside the game, but inside the game as well.
Oh,
So parents need to understand the community guidelines. It provides an incredible teachable moment for parents. Look at the community guidelines with your child. It sort of gives you the rules of the road. It's the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
yeah. I think
But
we
the
could stop
community,
right there, right?
yeah, I
It's
mean,
so
community
important.
guidelines are a great teachable moment for parents and kids to work together. But also inside the games, there are features that allow you to block, mute, or report other players. So, if your child is being exposed to inappropriate behavior from another player, or, somebody's harassing them or being too aggressive, or just makes them uncomfortable, they can block, mute, and report.
Yeah.
So that's really valuable for parents to understand.
No, that helps so much, because it's so true that with the different ages, you're not always sure. So I think knowing more and really digging in there, that helps. And you mentioned block, restrict, report, and so for me, these are just some, keeping out the negative things. So I want to go over to Dr. Rachel now, please, and just ask you, because we're hearing about so many sometimes negative things associated, especially if we're reading in the media, about playing video games. And as a psychologist and research expert, can you talk about the various ways that video games can actually be beneficial? Everybody listen up, because I know this is exciting.
Yes, games bring a lot to the table. Of course, it's important to talk about the potential dangers of play, when too much is too much, and we can talk about that. But there's also a lot of things to celebrate when it comes to the benefits of games. The first is games and learning. Games are valuable tools for learning because they are fun. Our kids, I want to play them. And it's typically because they balance the challenge of the game with the skill of the player. And in psychology, we call that a state of flow. And in this state of flow, learning is optimized. So research has found games can teach us things like problem solving and multitasking and creativity. And what's notable here is a lot of this is unintentional. So when we go to play, Andy mentioned farming. I love Stardew Valley. It's a farming simulator. When we go to play that, we're not learning so much about farming, but we're learning about resource management and time management and these sorts of things. There's also a range of social benefits. From the outside in, games can sometimes seem like a solitary activity, but it's really an integral part of social lives for many of us. Adults during the pandemic for sure, but teenagers, even in the before times and now. Currently, recent research has found 75% of people play games with others at least some of the time. So this can help us reinforce our pre-existing friends. It can help us meet new online friends. And what brings us together more than saving the world is what I like to say. And lastly, mental health. So playing video games has a range of mental health benefits, reduce stress for one, releasing of endorphins. It helps take us from stress to less stress. It helps us manage our moods. And also being part of a gaming community, going back to that social aspect, has been linked to things like reduced depression and reduced anxiety. So a lot of good things to talk about as well.
Oh, for sure. And I'm just smiling ear to ear because as soon as you mentioned resource management, I started thinking about Minecraft and how I know all the trees,
Yes.
all the different types of wood there is because of
You
Minecraft.
know?
Yeah.
And my daughter as well. My daughter's 6. She loves Minecraft. She can spell all the kinds of trees.
There you go. See, we just didn't know. But then once again, you and I were playing the games with our kids. So I'm going to ask that same sort of flip side of the question there is
Mhm.
what type of research what kind of strategies and support can you give to parents who are not playing with their children?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't want to play with their kids. My parents never played with me, and I get it. It's fine. You don't have to play with your kids. I mean, I encourage it, but you don't have to. I generally give the same advice though, actually, for people who play and people who don't. And there's 3 things I always say: be intentional, be present, and have fun. So be intentional. This goes back to what Pat was saying. Be intentional with the media you're bringing into your house. Look at the age ratings, look at the content ratings, and make sure it's appropriate for your child. Be present. So that's either play with them or just be present in the room, like just sitting down next to them while they play, and watching what they play, which gives you a good firsthand look at what they're playing or who they're playing with. But also just asking basic questions. What are you playing? Why do you like it? Showing interest in what your children have interest in can really open up a whole bunch of conversations. And I strongly encourage all parents to do that with their children. It'll also quell some of your anxiety, because I think a lot of parents have anxiety about what are they playing and who are they with and what are they doing, and problem solved just by sitting and asking a few questions. And lastly, have fun. And this goes back to what Andy said and what you said in the beginning, family game night. Games are fun. They're developed to be fun. And even if you don't like playing games, they can be a great jumping off point. So if your children really like sports games, maybe, go to a sporting event or, host a little party at home and watch a sporting event on TV. So there are other ways to use it as a springboard for family activities that you all enjoy.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing so much though is that how we can use games as teachable moments, as family moments, as learning moments. I mean, there are just so many opportunities. And I think a lot of parents may not realize this because they're just thinking, oh, video games. And there's just so much more. So I'm glad that we're able to just really pull out a lot of these benefits. But I would like to also mention another community that we're not always thinking about when we're thinking about video games. And that's sometimes families with disabilities. My own niece has Down syndrome. So I know how much she loves her video games. So I would love to flip back over to Andy and ask you, Andy, can you provide some specific tips about choosing video games for families with disabilities?
I think the first thing to say is that when you're looking for games, there's a whole broad range of what you're looking for, and all sorts of accessibilities and impairments are provided for in lots of different games. And the challenge is often finding, the games that you need for your family. And one way that I've been helping with that is the database that I run, Family Video Game Database, has this section where you can put in a very precise criteria. So you pick the ESRB rating, maybe you pick the platform that you've got, but then you can also say, maybe I need subtitles, or maybe I need really clear text, or maybe I'm looking for a game that has the audio narrated to me. And you can combine that with the other criteria to find games that will suit your particular requirements. But that's kind of, I think the message is that it's easy for us to kind of rule ourselves out of games. And increasingly, many games offer, either by inclusive design or by specific accessibility options, really great ways to include the whole family. And actually the game can be a place where maybe children who aren't able to get involved in games in the playground in a physical sense can actually sort of compete and play on a par with their peers in an online game. And so there's a lot of value for that, but it does take a little bit of research. And so hopefully this section of the database is a step towards that. There are also other sites like Can I Play That, which is a great community of players and experts helping parents find games that suit their particular family's needs.
Oh no, that's fantastic. So that means that, you know, you can, even as a child with disabilities, you can create that avatar, you can have all the superpowers just like everybody else. And I just think it's so fantastic. And I love that you mentioned inclusive by design. But, you know, I'm hearing all of these fabulous things. And one of the things that I do is I talk to a lot of parents and they always say, but I didn't know, and I don't know where to find this. So Pat, I'm going to go over to you and ask you, I mean, I already answered that question about to what extent do they actually know, but, you know, what can we do? How can we help parents, you know, finding these tools that and to use that are available to them?
Yeah. Well, if you start with the rating system, we've been around now for over 25 years. We have very high awareness and use. You know, we've now served multi-generations of gamers, and they're now parents. Awareness of the ESRB rating systems in like the mid 80 percentile range, and 3/4 of parents say they regularly check them. That means all the time or most of the time. So we have very, very strong awareness and use of the ratings. I couldn't be happier about that. Parental controls, parents are aware of them. The majority of parents are aware of them.
Do they use them?
They are using them. I think, you know, the top 3 would be, you know, to control spending, to control
Yes.
games by rating, and also to
Probably
control
time. Restrict
yeah,
communication.
yes, but I think it's more about, you know, the spending and the age rating.
That's what I'm thinking for my family. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, it's also really important, you know, I mean, as we said before, the household rules, most parents have them. We find that flexibility about those rules varies depending on what they're trying to establish as a rule. So again, when it comes to spending money, they're least flexible about that. When it comes to what games they can play, they're least flexible about that. Sort of matches the types of controls that they're likely to be setting. But one thing that I would say where we need to increase awareness and use is in the in-game features. So whether it's the community guidelines that are available, you know, as we discussed earlier, they can really be great teachable moments with kids. But also, you know, those in-game features that allow players, but especially children, to block, mute, or report other players that make them feel uncomfortable. I think we need to do better to raise awareness of those among parents. But you know, I think, you know, parents, look, what we find in our research is that most parents trust their kids to do the right thing, and they trust others. So, you know, that has to be taken into account too, that this isn't all about, you know, setting hard rules and, you know, hard and fast rules that aren't flexible. And by the way, don't change over time. You know, it's really important, as I said earlier, to keep that conversation going, to keep these rules evolving and adjusting as time goes on and as your child matures, of course. But the most important thing for me when I talk to parents is don't stigmatize video games in the home. As Rachel said, and and Andy has said, you know, video games are really a source of fun and enjoyment. And if the more that you focus on the negative with your child, the less apt they are to come to you if they have issues. So it should be a positive aspect of family life. And so I think it's really important to avoid stigmatizing video games as something negative in the home. It should be something perceived as positive, so that your child can, you know, can discuss it openly with you and discuss what they're playing, with whom, you know, things like that. So,
oh my goodness. So I just know that the participants are sitting there saying, okay, well, we thought we were just going to hear video games. And that was like total mic drop on serious digital parenting, about trusting your child, about having communications, about being flexible. Oh my God, Pat, thank you. Because really you just wrapped it all up with a bow, because this is what it's all about, right? And I just think it's lovely. And I hope that all the parents who are listening, that they keep sharing, because really the key point is awareness. So, keep sharing this webinar, the video, let people know, point to the websites and resources, because if we all know, then we can all do our part with raising all of our families. So I'm going to jump back now if I can. I just like kind of picking different boxes. So Rachel, I'm going to come over to you now and ask you, what should parents do if their children are spending a little bit more time to playing video games than they think they should? Because I know everybody's listening saying, okay, screen balance, what can I do? What can I do? So give us some
I
tips,
think
please.
that's the biggest question I hear from parents is, what is the magic number? How much is too much? And how do I keep them from playing too much? Games should just be one of many things our kids do. And I think that, as Pat said, and as Andy said, it's just another form of media. We watch a lot of Netflix and we play a lot of games, but we also play sports and all the things that make up our leisure time. And it's also important to recognize what you think is more than they should is not necessarily what your child thinks is more than they should, because games serve different purposes, right? It's not just about a frivolous activity, which I think it's often perceived as. It's a social experience, first of all, but it could also be about stress release and all those other things I talked about. But that said, if you think your child is playing in a way that is too much and it's causing problems in other areas of their lives, physically, socially, psychologically, occupationally, if you're at that kind of impasse, then I would advise seeking, professional assistance. But that said, usually what we're seeing are periods of high engagement. It's a weekend and they have more time to play, or it's a pandemic and they can't play outside. So it's about finding the line between what is my child's just more engaged right now, they're socializing with their friends, and when is it actually something that's problematic and pathological.
And are there any sort of like key symptoms that parents can look for? Just because it sounds like, okay, this is great, but how do I know then when there's that click and when it turns into something a bit more? Is there anything that we could be looking out for particularly?
Yeah, there are some guidelines that are out there, like from the World Health Organization specifically, but I think the important thing to think about is, are they playing a lot, or is it negatively impacting all areas of their lives for an extended period of time? So the time threshold is 12 months or more.
Right.
And it's really about impacting everything. So like I said, social, physical, psychological. So if it's not to that extreme point, it is much more likely to just be, a period of high engagement.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you mentioned the World Health Organization, because what they described was gaming disorder. And I think what a lot of parents are describing are just the fact that I called my child and they didn't put the iPad down when I wanted them to come to dinner.
Yes.
So they're addicted, and it's like, no, that's not quite it.
Let me share a quick story, because that's a great point. Parents say, 5 more minutes and the child is still playing. 2 things to think about here. 1, our brains are not fully formed as children, and we do not understand the perception of time. Like, we legitimately do not until we're like mid-20s. So saying 5 more minutes, they are not really able to determine what 5 minutes feels like. The second is, games are fun, and it's like eating a donut. And if I was eating a donut and you came up to me and snatched that donut,
it would be on.
We would be upset. The same is about games. So just keep that in mind. Kids are not well at regulating time. I advise like the 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes. And I know it sounds a bit, like hovering, but children are still trying to learn this skill. And it's really important to scaffold them to learn how to regulate their own behaviors.
Well, you said,
can I add just one point to that?
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt Rachel, because she knows her stuff like nobody else. But I think it's also important for parents to understand the flow of a game. So oftentimes, a child might be in the middle of a Fortnite match, or isn't at a point in the game where he or she can save it, and the parent is sort of outside and unaware of sort of the flow and the psychology of competing. And I think it's really important for parents to respect the flow, to understand the flow, instead of like demanding, no, you must come right now. Instead, sort of let them finish their match, or because they're letting down other players if they pull out often at an undesirable time. So I just think that that's another aspect of sort of the whole screen time management, is really understand the dynamics and the flow of the game.
And this is why communication is important, because if I say, what are you playing? And they're like, oh, it's a Fortnite match. Oh, they can last up to 30 minutes. Now, as a parent, I can gauge
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you start hearing the conversations where the kids are playing and then you're saying, okay, well, as soon as you're dead, then you can come and have dinner.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not quite what I meant, but yeah, it's exactly if you use up that life or if, if the world restricts, et cetera. So I think this is a great conversation. And again, all of these things that we're talking about it just as it deals with children. And we're talking about, regulation. And I do think that adults, myself included, that we can also have some issues with self-regulation. But more importantly, we know and we're aware, but I would like to ask all three of you, how can we help parents with younger children? How can they teach the really, really little people how to self-regulate if we already see that it's a struggle for ourselves, for teenagers, for young people? Does anybody have any ideas or strategies that they want to share? And you can just jump right in because this is free for all now.
I'll just reiterate the countdown. I find that the countdown is very effective, and not a lot of parents really utilize it. My parents were very much like, 5 minutes, what are you still doing on there? And not understanding that I still had the same life and I couldn't pause that game. So I think the countdown is really important, and you start it from an early age because games, are the most prevalent form of media entertainment today, and they will only continue to be. So the earlier you start, the better.
Fabulous. Andy, I'm going to hop over to you. You ready?
Yeah, I think particularly when they're younger, if they have a really varied diet, if we think about kind of like the nutrition of games that they're playing, if they're playing lots of different games, firstly, there's lots of reasons to switch. And every time you switch play, then it's like, oh, perhaps I should do something else. And you can have a conversation with them about what they want to play next. And also one of the criteria we added on the database was how long the game takes to play in rounds. And you can find games that are, 30 seconds to a minute for each round. And so that's quite a nice way from a younger age, just get into the habit that, we're going to try different things. We're not just going to always be consuming this same thing, like, always eating sweets. We will eat them sometimes, but then other times we're going to have some vegetables as well. And that going back to that thing of kind of demonstrating and finding it, there's a common ground, if we're playing games as well, we can demonstrate how we play a variety of things. It's like trying to get my kids to eat vegetables. If I had never eaten them, they would be like, wait a minute, you're not doing this. So it's kind of modeling some of that helps as well, I think.
Yeah, modeling behavior is very important. And Pat, I'm going to go over to you.
Yeah, I would just say, and this isn't just about games. This is more about sort of screen time in general. Kids model their parents' behavior. So if their parents are always on their phones or always on their tablets or always on their computers or always playing games, it's likely that the kid's going to be modeling similar behavior. So I think it's important for parents to also, walk the talk, as they say, and have that sort of balanced life that Andy was just talking about.
Okay, this is just a great conversation. And while we've been talking and discussing and exchanging with each other, there have been a few questions that have come into the Q&A section. And so I'm going to just remind all of our listeners to please ask your questions. Even if we don't get to them today, we will still answer your questions. So please put them in the chat, and I should say, or in the Q&A, not the chat. And I'm going to first take in a question that we had received when people submitted their questions into the webinar registration. So from Alicia, I have a question for Rachel or Andy, and this is just quite simply, what are good educational games and platforms for pre-teenagers? So I'm assuming 9 to 12-year-olds, right?
Minecraft is the first that comes to mind. My daughter is 6, which is younger, but she loves Minecraft. And the great thing about Minecraft is that it's very creative. And also you can create a world that is invite only. So she has a world and it's only her neighbor friends that can go in that world. So she's not playing with the whole of the internet, which I think is very important for younger children.
Okay. And she's also probably not playing in survivor mode either.
No, no, definitely not. No.
Go ahead, Andy. What were you
Yeah,
saying?
so it's interesting that we'll talk about education, and often we'll think about kind of the harder skills of like hand-eye coordination or strategy. But I think a lot of the games that I'm often recommending more recently are actually kind of softer skills about understanding our emotions, having a chance to reflect on those. there's a game I've just been looking at this week, recently out, called Rainbow Billy. And it's kind of like an adventure game, but the characters you meet all have a particular kind of foible about their personality. And you talk to them. The battles are actually conversations. And so you talk to them. And so that's a lot of fun, but also out of it, you are gaining in quite a nuanced way, both the chance to kind of engage with that topic, but then also as a parent, you get to try, if you play that with your child, you can talk to them, oh, why did that character behave like that? So a lot of these kind of softer skills, the video games can offer a really lovely way to do that. That's not confrontational, is very gentle, and kind of you can take it at your own pace, different to kind of sitting down and saying, okay, let's talk about anxiety or something. In a game, you can do that very gently, which is lovely.
Oh, that's great. And I just wrote down Rainbow Billy, because I think any games that are showing empathy and kindness are games that we all need to play. Pat, did you have anything, or did you want to add to that about any educational games or platforms especially as a mom to 2 kids, you probably remember some good ones.
I think, I had girls who love puzzle games, and so they gravitated towards the more casual games for the most part. But and look, there's so many games available across so many different types of devices. It's sort of hard to pick one. I mean, the recommendations that Rachel and Andy just made are great ones, but
that's the beauty of it, though, too.
Yeah,
that's great that we have so much choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have another question. Again, I'm just opening it up to all 3. This is from Alon, and it's, can you discuss the negative stigma that video games have, and is it warranted? I know, Rachel, you had touched upon it a bit, but
this is my soapbox, Dr. Elizabeth. I'm going to hop on, and then I'll let the other 2 hop on.
Okay.
The negative stereotypes of gamers are very pervasive. They've been around since the late 1970s when video games were first popularized in arcades. It was kind of the same persona of it's antisocial and it's problem behavior, and only the dregs of society engage in that kind of behavior. Not warranted. I mean, research has found there's no differences in the social ability, for instance, between people who play games and people who don't. Research has very well established that violent video games do not translate into violent real world behaviors as well. So no, I'll go short. No is my answer.
Okay. Anybody else?
I would just say, games are for all ages, and they're like movies and movies and TV. There are different genres for all different types of people who have different interests, and the average age of a gamer today is in their 30s, which often comes as a surprise to parents. So I think that parents really need to understand that games aren't necessarily for kids. They're wonderful games for kids, but they are a relatively small portion of the overall audience. And so when we talk about the negative aspects of games, no, not all games are appropriate for young people, but that doesn't make them bad. Right. It's just that they're intended for a completely different audience. That being said, our E for everyone category, which means that not necessarily that those games are intended for kids, but that they don't have any content that would be inappropriate for kids. That's always been our largest category. So parents have a ton of content available to them, a ton of different games available that if they, if they're interested, they have plenty to choose from. So I think that's also an important aspect of making sure that that parents know that there's plenty of good stuff out.
Right. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with the types of games, and there are all sorts of games, and there are different levels in the games, because even the example that I gave with Fortnite, that Dr. Rachel's daughter plays in creative mode and not survival mode, well, there you go. There are differences for different ages that even within a game that we as parents, we can be informed. What's interesting too is that I think you both, or perhaps all 3 of you, had mentioned chat, and there is a question in the chat that says, is online chatting safe for kids? But it also ties in to a question from Aaron which said, can you provide advice about allowing kids to play games online with strangers when communication is allowed, when we're talking about chatting again? So let's just do this. Let's talk about online chatting for kids. What do we think?
Shall I go? So I mean, so the thing that I'll often say to parents is start slowly and start together. And so by finding games, and again, those ESRB for everyone games are a good place to start, that are appropriate for younger children, but have very simple ways to interact. So lots of games you can chat, but it's just preset messages or maybe even just sounds you're sharing. But there's this very gentle interaction going on. And you can take these baby steps into that online space, which establishes that this is somewhere that both parents and children are together. And then if something untoward happens or unsettling happens for the child, they'll come and tell you. And that's kind of what you want. What you don't want is for them to feel like, oh, if I tell mum, dad, I'm going to lose my game, because last time I did it, they were like, okay, you'll have to stop playing. And so by taking those small steps together, you can really, I think you can set out the stall of your family for kind of safety and a really, really healthy, open conversation here. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, it's so important that you said conversation, because it really is that. It's Pat had mentioned earlier about having these trusted conversations. We need them to trust us as parents. Pat, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think it goes back to sort of establishing household rules. One of the things that we know parents are, it's the top of the list in terms of their concern is the sharing of personal information. I mean, that's sort of like number one rule, that your child doesn't share personal information about themselves when they're playing online with anybody. But parental controls can obviously help manage with whom their child plays with, if it's only friends or if it's, a broader audience. But, as Andy said, gradual sort of, gradual easing up of those rules, I think, is important as the child matures and gets more comfortable in a given environment. But that's, community rules, great teachable moment. Look at those community rules, and that's a great conversation to have about, how do I behave online and what can I expect from other players?
Ooh, that is a
And
good
how
one.
can I be a good citizen within this community?
Right.
And I think that's a really wonderful place to start as well.
Yeah, I like that, because we all want to be, good gamers, positive gamers. And Rainbow Billy, I said, I'm going to go check that out. So I would like to invite the three of you to take a peek at the Q&As as well, to see if there's anything that you really feel strongly about. And I'm going to take one more question that I received previous, and that was, can we expand a bit about how much time playing video games is appropriate? And I know that we've talked about this before, but I really think that the fact that we're seeing this question and that we see versions of it in the chat, it just means that it's so, so important for parents. So does anybody want to just provide some quick tips about how much playing video game time is appropriate? And I think there's a distinction. She's not asking how much being online is appropriate or how much of anything. She's specifically video games.
There's no magic number, and every child is different. And there was, if we want to take a research-based approach, there was a research article came out this year called Digital Diet, but if it compares it to our food pyramid, it's the same idea. Games are one part of our digital diet. We have online schooling, or we have Skyping with grandma, and we have video games. So how much is too much depends on the balance of the pyramid and the other things that your children are participating in. And it's never the answer that parents want to hear, because they want to hear 2 hours. Well, sometimes 2 hours is more than enough Minecraft time. And sometimes, my daughter is building something spectacular with all of her friends are online and she's playing more than 2 hours, and that's okay too.
And we also found that during the pandemic, with so much time at home and so much more screen time, that we found that parents in general are being more flexible about screen time in the home, and also about how much games can play, because, as Rachel has said, throughout, games are a social experience, and being able to connect with your friends and make new ones has been a real boon in a world where, there's been so much isolation at home. And so, it's not, as Rachel said, there's no magic formula. I think it's to each his own, but again, important to establish some rules, get your homework done, make sure your chores are done, make sure that if you aren't around a lot, that you're familiar with the parental controls, so you can set time limits, including, the day of the week and how much time per week, or so. There are lots of things that parents can do to manage screen time, but I think most parents are more flexible today than they may have been, say, a couple of years ago,
Right.
pre-pandemic.
And I just want to build on what you were saying about, just the family rules. And I just want to remind parents that even if they have, their own device locked down and their own children only have, 7+ games and that's it, they can still see these games on somebody else's tablet at school, et cetera. So that's why we have to have conversations so that way our children are trusting us and that we say, listen, I don't want you playing Call of Duty right now. You can wait until later, until you have the right age. And that they say, okay, because inevitably they can see it on YouTube, they can play it on somebody else's, and these are things that we have to keep those conversations going. While I just had you, Pat, there was a question in the chat. Does the ESRB information exist in Spanish?
Oh, great question.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, we just launched a new website called, and I don't speak Spanish, so excuse me for the pronunciation, but Vamos a Jugar, which is in English, let's play.
Yeah.
And it aggregates all of the things that we have that have been translated in Spanish, including our ratings guide, including some of our blogs, just basic information for Spanish speaking households. So that's been a relatively new initiative. We've always had certain assets available in Spanish, but now we've actually pulled them together into a unique website for
Well, there we go.
for those families.
Great. So Monica's going to be
great
happy.
question. Yeah. Thank you for asking
it. So as I'm digging in, because of course, as we're ending, more and more questions are coming in. So let's go a little bit faster. There is a question for you, Andy, from Stephen. I'm going to read the question and then you can go ahead and answer it. It says from Stephen, do you have any advice for parents who want to keep up with the rapidly developing trends for games? For example, the super fast rise to market dominance of games like Among Us. And yeah, I played that one too. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? It can easily feel like it's kind of impossible to keep up. I think the first thing to say is actually kids are the ones who've got the kind of their finger on the pulse of this. And, I run this database, and one of the key things I do is have lots of conversations with my kids and with friends and family's kids. Often we go over for a meal. I'm like, oh, what are you playing? Like, tell me. And listening to what they're playing and asking questions about it is actually a great way to signpost that. And Among Us was on the database and on my radar first because my kids were playing it before it was in the news. And so having those conversations, I think, is really good to stay on top of it. But also you get that contextual kind of story, like why is it interesting, or why is it exciting? Everyone's playing this, but what is it about that game? And then the second thing I think is it's easy to feel like it's impossible to ever keep up, that they'll always be ahead of you. But once you kind of have those conversations, it's actually not nearly as hard as you imagine. Talking with a child half an hour a week about this, and you'll very quickly be up to speed with them, a bit of Googling, and you'll be a little bit ahead of them. So I think I'd like to encourage parents to just spend a little bit of time because it's not as kind of mysterious and impossible to catch up with as it can seem.
Yeah, and I think that's a great answer because it covers all digital parenting. All the games are going to change. The social media is going to change. The devices are going to change, but our conversations with our kids have to remain and continue all the time. Rachel, I'm going to go to you. Oops, go ahead, Pat. Sorry.
No, I see Catherine's asked a question about constructive games. Is there a trend in the industry regarding developing less violent games, these high violence, low morality, low whatever? Okay, anyway, what I want to talk about is the fact that our mature rating category for 17 and older, which tends to include a lot of more violent video games, is only 13% of the games that we rated last year. So what I want, you may see ads for the Call of Duties of the world or, other games that are intended for older audiences, but they don't represent the majority of the games that are out there. And as I said earlier, the E for Everyone category has always been our largest category. I haven't seen that change over the 20 plus years we've been rating games. The percentages may fluctuate a little bit, but the E category and the E10 plus category has always composed the majority of games that companies are putting out. So I don't buy into this notion that the industry is just putting out a lot of violent video games. It's just not true. So I wanted to make sure that answer was very clear.
Yeah,
Because
no,
it's a misperception, and
yeah,
it's
no,
not,
crystal clear.
correct.
Yeah, no, I love it because I hear that often as well. So I'm going to be happy to go out there and say, nope, not true. At the statistics, I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I would just say, as Rachel and Andy have also said, there are just some amazing games out there that are about all sorts of creativity or relationships, or, games provide so many different ways to interact and learn, and whether it's, gaining empathy or problem solving or strategic thinking or collaborative skills, or so many different types of enhanced, learning benefits.
Yeah, I mean, you can't put a price on beating your 6-year-old at Mario Kart. I'm sorry, but there's no greater joy as a parent.
Okay, well, Dr. Rachel, while I have you here, okay, wait, first for all three of you, will you be able to stay a little bit longer, because we have just more and more questions coming in. So I promise not to keep you more than 5-10 more minutes, but this is just awesome. So Dr. Rachel, this question came from Anshul. Any suggestions on parents, how parents can facilitate the child to close the gaming session without being obstructive?
Yeah, I think it goes back again to what we've said, but I really want to reiterate the point. Games should be a conversation, so they are not a conflict. Like Pat mentioned, understand what game you're playing, how long it's going to take, so you as a parent have the parameters, so you can't set unrealistic expectations. If my child has been at school all day and their friends are not in their class anymore, and they only see their friends when they are playing around a Fortnite after school, and they just sat down, and I'm like, oh, 5 minutes, they need at least 30, right? So having the conversation, understanding the context of the game, and giving them the countdown, I think you will see it'll be a night and day transition, because it's a conversation between you and your child, instead of just kind of forcibly making these really hard and fast rules.
Okay, and so I'm going to ask you.
Oh, if I could dive in.
Oh, boy, you people are just loving this. This is great. Go, Andy, go.
Yeah, in that area, I think it's easy to miss kind of quite some nice work that kids are doing if they're playing with their friends. They often want to wrap up and do this kind of etiquette work, really, that we would want them to do, but we don't hear it if they're using headphones. And I sometimes compare it to if I'm on the phone and my wife, if she's cooked that day, says, "Oh, it's tea time, dinner time." She doesn't expect me to drop the phone and come straight away. She knows that I will round the conversation up. And if she came in and took the phone and put it down, I'd be like, what are you doing? And so it's easy to miss that because we're not familiar with that. And then a child can sometimes be told off for doing, something which actually we'd probably quite like them to do, to say goodbye nicely. When should we play again? Thanks for your time and goodbye, sort of thing. And so just kind of get a bit more involved in kind of thinking through how they're behaving, I think can suddenly avoid some of these kind of miscommunications that can lead to a tension or an argument that you don't need to have.
I love it. That was worth it.
So Erica asked an interesting question about how do you make friends online without sharing personal information about yourself? When I talk about personal information, I'm talking about personally identifiable information. In other words, an email address, a street address, a phone number, a name, a birth date. And I think it's really important for parents to make sure that their child is not sharing that type of information. So, a gamer tag isn't personally identifiable information. An avatar is not personally identifiable information. So you can have plenty of fun online talking to other players without sharing personally identifiable information.
Okay, thank you. Another question to all three of you is, what is one of the most important life lessons you've learned from video games? This came from Jonathan. I'll go first. I'll just say fair play. Fair play, right? Just like that book. Everything I ever learned, I learned in kindergarten. I mean, it's just that simple.
That's a good answer. I would say persistence, that just keep trying to get Bowser. Eventually you'll get him.
You'll get it.
And I think for me, it's actually the value of doing things which aren't productive. I spend a lot of my time, I'm quite a productive person, a bit of an overachiever. And actually a game, I have to grant myself permission to play games. So it's just kind of time that's just, not to try and produce anything that's particularly valuable. It's just the value of just this time enjoying myself, or either on my own or with the family, and that's okay. We don't always need to be productive and, you know, producing some amazing things. So that's quite a nice kind of antidote to some of my personality quirks.
Okay, Pat, did you have anything? An important life lesson? Oh,
Sorry. No, I mean, I think, you know, the fact that games are providing such an incredible way to connect with other people, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family, whether it's extended family, and make new friends while having fun. It's just, to me, you know, one of the most fascinating and impactful sort of parts of life that for those who aren't engaging, I think they may find it's, you know, it's enlightening.
Well, for me, I'm going to answer again in a weird way, because listening to Pat, one of the things that I have learned is that an important life lesson is that games are just like life, where Pat had said, you know, there are so many positive things in games. There are so many more positive games out there and appropriate games, but we don't hear about that. And it's just like life. We always forget about the good stuff. So thank you, Pat, because that's my life lesson for this webinar. Okay, so any other questions that either of you want to answer? Would you like me to just keep on asking you a question? What do you think? Oh, and Shul is just putting in tons of questions. Okay, so listen, Patricia, Andy, Dr. Rachel, if you see a question that you want to answer, go for it, because we're at time. So I'm going to go ahead and pick just two more then, unless you pipe up.
Can
okay?
I want to pick one.
Yes, please.
My kids are so much better at playing games than me. It's one of the reasons I don't play with them. Any suggestions? Kids love it when you're terrible at the game. My daughter, I am not good at Minecraft. She thinks it's the best thing ever. Don't let that keep you from playing. It's still fun and it's still engaging, and we can't be great at everything. And as Andy mentioned, you can practice while they're not around, and then you can impress them with your skills. When my kids picked up Mario Kart, they did not know what was coming when Mama picked up the controller. But they get their payback with Minecraft. So don't let that keep you from trying. It's still fun.
And there's some nice games where you have experts and novices and you work together, and sometimes the parent's the expert and sometimes the parent's the novice, and kind of that flipping of kind of power in the relationship is a really healthy thing to do. So, and you know, kids obviously like that if they get to be the one who knows what's what.
That's lovely. Okay, so I'm going to do one last question. What about mobile games? Because they can be a little bit trickier to have to deal with and manage and to parent.
So mobile games do have ratings. You'll find actually ESRB ratings for all mobile games in the Google Play Store. Apple has its own rating system. So please consult those ratings. They're there. I think that the dynamics of mobile games are a little different, in part because most mobile games are free to play.
Mhm.
So developers have to try to find some way to, fund the development of the game. And so, whether it's through in-game purchases or through, advertising. So the dynamics of mobile games are quite different. The business models are quite different. Whereas, for the physical video game market, or the downloadable game market on the traditional consoles, those games, you pay an upfront fee, and you get hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of gameplay that some of it might be monetized through in-game purchases, but not all the time. And it's important to that's where the parental controls come in. And you wouldn't give your car keys to a child who doesn't drive. And I think it's important not to give the endless spending to a child who's not actually at the end of the day paying for it.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. And I think that with that wonderful, just perfect tip, I'm going to go ahead and ask people, if you still have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm so sorry that we did not have enough time to answer them, but I promise you that if you send us an email to webinar at esrb.org. And you can see it right there on your screen. You can send any additional questions or comments. Again, I'm really sorry that I didn't get a chance to get through them all, but you could hear the conversation. We were just having too much fun. And I would also love to point you to resources. You saw the esrb.org. There's also resources in Spanish. TakeThis.org, which you'll also be able to find some wonderful goodies from Dr. Rachel. Taming Gaming will show you that wonderful database that Andy was talking about, where you have no excuses. You should get in there and dig and find everything that you need. InternetMatters.org, they have wonderful informational guides for parents about different games, about ratings, etc. And also a last favorite, Media Smarts in Canada, where you can find resources in both English and French. So there you have it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, please, if you have any other questions, send them in. We will not forget you. And I would like to thank all the panelists, because this has just been so much fun. We should do this weekly. I'm here.
It was great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank you everybody who attended and participated, and great questions, and we'll try to answer all of them.
Great. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.